Okay, so one problem with MNIST is that it's easy, right? So the images have all been size normalized. That means they've all been shrunk, so they basically take up the same amount of screen area. They've all been centered, so they're all right in the middle of the thing, of the image. They're also small, right? So this, if you're thinking, wait a minute, there were 768 inputs. That doesn't seem small. It's small for an image, okay? So if you take like an image with your camera, that's going to be probably at least 1080p, right? Which is going to be many, many more pixels, right? So our images of handwritten digits were 28 by 28 by 1. An image you take with a camera, assuming it's high def, right? It's going to be, I don't know, right? I'm going to... But something like 30, what am I doing? That, right? I'm not going to feed this into a calculator. It is much, much larger than this, right? So on the scale of these things, very, very small, right? And single channel. Not a whole lot of data there. If you think about it for a minute, this is actually quite a big help, that the images are size normalized and centered, right? Because to our network, if I have this square, right, then this digit, and ooh, that yellow is a bad choice. This digit, even though they're both 8s, are activating completely different input units, right? And if we want the network to be able to to respond the same way to an 8, no matter where it is in the image plane, and no matter how large it is, that actually becomes a very subtle problem, right? Because we have to make sure that sort of some reasonable representation of every 8, sort of every position and every scale, is included in our training set. MNIST does not do that at all. MNIST centers and sizes all of them the same so that our network doesn't have to learn to manage transformations of the digit it's trying to recognize in the space of the image, right? That's actually going to be a big deal, and we're actually going to talk about later a special type of network architecture that is specifically designed to respond well to the input pattern it's looking for being scaled and moved around, okay? And in particular, this is also a weakness of models that are trained on MNIST. They often cannot handle when their input moves around at all because they're not trained on it. All right. So because of this, MNIST is basically solved, all right? So you can get arbitrarily low loss with a fairly small and unsophisticated network, as we just saw. One aggregator that I found, and this is not like a scientific survey, I'm not recommending the thing you're going to get if you click on this, but it was just like a short, lazy search, shows error rates down to 0.21%, right? And what I think that means, right, is that, is that we are getting, right, 1 out of 500 wrong at that point, right? So it's not like error rate 21%, which is 21 out of 100. It's error rate 0.21%, right? Note that I've read, I can't give you a citation for this, but I believe it is true, that neural nets, and again, not very sophisticated ones, can actually beat human performance on MNIST. So for these reasons, MNIST is not very useful as a benchmark anymore, right? It's not particularly useful as a training set because we know that like this size normalized and centered limitation, well, it would be a significant problem for, okay, we know that that's a significant problem, and it's not very good as like a benchmark for publication because we know that you don't have to be a very large and smart network to do arbitrarily fairly well. Okay? My kitty has come over. Hello, kitty. So, oh, right. So one other sort of point to make here. Notice that I'm not saying 100%, right? The point of solved is not 100% performance because, as a general rule, this never ever happens, right? Loss never goes to 0. That's not the goal. Accuracy never becomes 100%. That just doesn't happen. We talk in terms of, like, right, arbitrarily low loss. Being able to pick however small a number you want within some reason and build a network that will get there, right? We talk about, beating human performance at a given task, right? As a note, this is, a couple of people have already talked to me about project ideas, and I've said that some of them are too simple. This is kind of part of why, right? So to pick an example, one student asked me about blood pressure, right? I have like a heart disease data set. Can I train a network on that? My expectation is that is also going to be a trivial to solve problem, right? You're going to be able to build a small network that is not very complicated, right? That will be able to do arbitrarily well on that data. Why do I think that? Well, because we have a bunch of numbers that are pretty strong, direct predictors of heart disease, right? So what is your heart rate, right? If you give me your resting heart rate as 2 inputs, right? So input 1, so your input vector is something like this, right? It's systolic, I think is the first one. And then diastolic? I forget what the other one is, right? And then the third input is like high cholesterol, right? Does a person have high cholesterol? And maybe that's going to be 0 or 1 for yes and no. And then the fourth one is family history of heart disease. And again, 0 or 1 for yes and no. If your input is shaped like this, then the rule over this is pretty simple, right? The higher this number goes, right, the higher your heart rate or your blood pressure goes over 120, right, the more heart disease you have, right? That's a pretty good predictor of like a heart attack, right? If you tell me that somebody's, like person A has a blood pressure of 180 over like 120 and person B is 119 over 79, then this datum alone is very predictive of which of these two people is at high risk for heart attack, right? And if you also give me high cholesterol, that datum alone is going to separate low and high heart attack risk very cleanly, right? And if you give me family history, that datum alone is going to separate those two very cleanly. All of these are very predictive, right? So if you have a data set like this, right, that's 4 input, 1 output, and every one of those inputs is predictive, so you can use a fairly small network to do this and be done by lunch, right? And if the goal is to spend 40 hours on this project, that's not good, right? So we need to be a little more complicated than that.